Welcome to the MEF2C cast, the podcast advocating for the MEF2C haploinsufficiency community by broadcasting the voices within. I'm Eli.
And I'm Haley. We are parents to a boy with MCHS and autism, sharing our journey with you throughout conversations grounded in learning, support, and community.
This is Advocacy Amplified. Do you have questions, comments, or a story to share? Want to be a guest on the show? Connect with the MEF2Ccast on Facebook, mef2ccast.com, or email us at mef2cast@gmail.com.
If you enjoy the show, please support us by subscribing to the show on Apple and Spotify, leaving us a review, and following us on social media. You can also buy MEF2Ccast merch at our Shopify store, linked in the podcast description. The MEF2Ccast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily of the podcast or its sponsors. This is not medical advice. Consult a healthcare professional for medical concerns.
Alrighty, hi everybody, and welcome to the MEF2Ccast. Our guest today is Erika Anderson. Erika is a board-certified behavior analyst, which people may know more informally as sort of the therapists who administer ABA therapy, and she works at a local school district to us. How are you today, Erika?
Good, how are you?
We're good. So can you start by just telling us a little bit about your personal story and what made you decide to become a BCBA?
Yeah, so it all kind of started in high school, actually. I had a teacher who was super passionate about autism. I think I was a junior when I went to my first kind of autism summit with her. It was me, her, and another student. And ever since then, I knew I wanted to work with the autism population, but I didn't really know how. I mean, when we were in high school 10 years ago now, which is insane, there wasn't really a whole lot of information other than just public school special education for students with autism around here. So I didn't really know where I wanted to go. My sister ended up working as a registered behavior technician, which is kind of like the direct care therapist that works within ABA as well. And I kind of fell in love with the field and the work that she was doing. That's kind of a whole different story looking back on the type of ABA we did. I'll get into that kind of as we go through it on kind of my stance on current ABA practices. But overall, throughout that, I finished my undergrad in psychology, kept going with that track while interning as a registered behavior technician, and then decided just to keep going into my master's for applied behavior analysis. So I knew I wanted to work in a school eventually, but my initial goal was just to kind of be a clinical BCBA, which I was okay with. I wasn't really sold on. And then Ohio County Schools, which is where I currently work, opened up a position as a registered behavior technician. So I jumped on it, took a massive pay cut. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was living by myself in this apartment I couldn't afford, but I was like, I can't pass up this opportunity. So I just ran with it, and it all worked out in the end because I can't imagine doing anything else than what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So can you just start by explaining sort of generally what ABA therapy is and what a BCBA sort of does within that scope?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit different. With my school district, we don't have any kind of insurance billing. We don't have any like formal procedures that we have to follow, which it has its perks and its downsides. I don't have to do anything with like I said, the insurance billing. So our goals are just based off of an IEP. So we don't have specific things that we have to target throughout the school year. Everything that we do is just kind of at our own discretion or based off of IEP goals that are already written. But kind of the overview of a board-certified behavior analyst is using evidence-based, step-by-step procedures, I guess, and step-by-step ways of teaching different tasks and breaking it down into smaller components, I guess. It's kind of hard to explain. I know what I do, but trying to explain to other people what I do is so hard. So for me specifically, I collaborate with a lot of teachers on how to kind of modify the classroom environment and make things more suitable for everybody. There's a big saying in ABA that you can't change a behavior, but you can change the environment. So most of what I do isn't a lot of one-on-one teaching. It's more environmental support. So working with teachers that need a little bit more help, just kind of making things more suitable across the board and providing some of those supports that they might not have access to otherwise.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, from what I can understand about ABA, it relies pretty heavily on operant conditioning,
Yes.
and I'm not making a direct comparison between ABA and sort of animal training, but I do have experience with sort of that end of things in animal behavior, and they rely on the same principles. Obviously, a human is not the same as training a dog or something, but a lot of the same underlying ideas apply.
Yeah, absolutely. They're both founded on behaviorism, which is Mr. Watson. He's big guy in the psych field. He kind of pioneered behaviorism as a whole, just recognizing that behavior is a product of its environment, which then led B.F. Skinner, which he's the big ring the bell for food guy. He kind of looked at it in the way as I can manipulate behavior by using reinforcement and using punishment. So then that had spiraled eventually into animal training, people training. People have used it for conversion therapies and things. So the initial principles within the field of psychology are all the same, and just how it has been applied and branched out is kind of where it differs. People
Yeah,
do use
and
ABA for animal training, though, based off of those principles from Skinner.
right, yes. Yeah, so let's just talk a little bit more about the history of ABA while we're on the subject. As I understand it, it was invented in the late 60s by a guy named Ivar Lovaas, correct?
Yep.
And his kind of intention originally, and I think it was reasonably well-meaning, was to try to sort of help autistic people to conform to society, to sort of mitigate things like stimming and help them learn like proper social behaviors and things like that. So can you talk about sort of the history of it and maybe the things that they got wrong initially and how it's changed to today?
Yeah, so Lovaas is kind of a touchy subject. The place that I used to work before, they were actually a Lovaas-based center. So everything that they had done at the time that I worked there was strictly Lovaas-led. He has, like, a certain protocol, I guess, like, curriculum that he uses, and that's what that center had used. At the time, that's the only ABA I knew. I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing. So we were using punishment procedures. We were saying no in kids' faces whenever they were getting the wrong answer instead of telling them, kind of prompting them through what the right things were. Obviously, we didn't do like shock therapy, but that was another big one that Lovas, he was hard found on shock therapy, gender expression therapy. He was really big on sexual preference therapy. I don't remember what the other ones were, but basically, his idea was you can make anybody do what you want them to do through abuse or coercion. So he took kind of the good parts of B.F. Skinner's work and manipulated it in a way to where, yes, you changed behavior, but it wasn't an ethical way to change behavior.
Yeah, so how has that changed over the years and sort of what are your attitudes towards, I guess, sort of being more inclusive as opposed to trying to get autistic people to conform to sort of typical society?
Honestly, I would say for the most part, we don't, especially when it comes to stimming or vocalizations. That's just something that we don't intervene with unless it's to the point to where it's harmful to themselves. If it's harmful to others, then yeah, we'll have to try to find a replacement. In a school setting, if it's so disruptive that the other kids can't learn, it's not fair to the other 27 kids that are in that room. We might have to adjust it, or not even replace it, but maybe move them to a separate area of the classroom or something. But that is completely different. Where I used to work before, we were shutting down any form of STEM. It was viewed as it makes you stand out and look different, whereas today it's embraced. We know through so much more research that stimming is a form of regulation and a calming technique that we just might not understand fully, but that's not something that we really push anymore in ABA as far as our practice goes. Some places are still a little bit iffy on that. For the most part, it's left up to parent discretion. If parents really don't want it, then ABA providers will try to limit that. In my experience, I haven't had any like that within our school district.
Yeah, I mean, you know, asking an autistic or person to not stim would be kind of like asking you or I, like, not to sneeze or not to cough or not to blink.
Right.
Like, that's just sort of a necessary behavior they need to for their body to function, and I personally don't think it's really fair. I mean, as you said, if it's inordinately distracting or anything like that, you have to consider the needs of
Mhm.
other people, but as long as they're not, you know, disrupting or hurting anyone, like, it just seems like, sort of a necessary behavior for them to get through the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all do. I'm sitting here, like, rubbing onto my fingers right now, and it's I've never
Right,
been
exactly,
diagnosed
yeah,
autistic, so it's something that we all do, just some of us might be a little bit more, and that's totally fine.
right. So, give us some examples of some goals you would set for children, specifically who may be nonverbal or non-ambulatory, because a lot of the children in the MCHS community would fall into those groups.
Yeah, so nonverbal, we work with that very frequently, especially in our pre-Ks where kiddos just they weren't really exposed to language or they're still trying to figure out what voice they have. So we typically in a school setting, we rely on speech. We're very, very close in collaboration with speech. The speech side of it is they kind of go through and do all of the assessments and the testing and see what kind of that they feel would work best. And we kind of bounce off of that. So LAMP AAC is one of the more popular ones in Ohio County. If they decide we want to use LAMP for this student, we will use either LAMP or we'll, like, print out the little picture cards of the LAMP device for our needs. Everything that we try to do communication-wise would be to decrease behavior. So, we don't do a full teaching of communication or, um, we do functional communication training instead of, like, a conversational speech training, if that makes sense. So we will take whatever communication system speech has gone through and try to prompt it in a way to where they can get their basic wants and needs met. But on top of just the wants and needs, we'll also look at, like, how they can access the curriculum, how they can make those friendships, how they can play, especially in pre-K. I mean, everything although the curriculum in pre-K is based off of play. So, we'll kind of work with them to work on, like, the peer interactions, the social skills, things like that. I've never actually had experience with non-ambulatory. That's one that I was looking through, like, some generic goals, I guess, of ones to see what I could come up with for that. That's not something that I really have any experience with, though, surprisingly.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
So, are you, because you said a lot of what you're doing is modifying the environment, are you, like, sitting down and having therapy sessions with individual students, or is that something you don't typically do?
As a BCBA, I don't really anymore. I do a lot of kind of the behind the scenes stuff. So I write like the assessments to see if they need a specialized environment. I work with the behavior technicians on what skills they should be focusing on. But ABA in general, yeah, we do have some we call them RBTs. We do have some RBTs in our county that will do a lot of that one-on-one support. We're trying something a little
Gotcha.
bit different this year with our pre-K program. So we have 2 developmental delay classrooms for our pre-K kiddos. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head what the qualifications are to get into that, but they're the ones who do need the most support. We're doing kind of like a we call it behavior boot camp, which is just kind of like the ringing name that we had come up with. But instead of doing strictly one-on-one time with the student, we're doing kind of a center rotation. So they see all of the different staff, all of the aides, and we teach the aides how to teach in a more systematic way, as well as teaching those skills to the students. So kind of a full classroom approach, if that makes sense, instead of just the sit at the table one-on-one style work.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So these can you take us through, like, what an actual session with that one of these RBTs would have with the kid would look like?
Yeah, so especially for our little ones, we work on a lot of requesting. So we want to get them to make choices for what they want, be able to say yes or no to whatever they do and don't want, providing opportunities for them to ask for the things that they do want so we could practice that kind of that I want, you have kind of language. Like I said, most of the kids that we have, they can't even ask for like a drink of water or things at that time that we can effectively say without aggressive behaviors. So we're kind of taking it all the way back to just starting from the beginning, and like we don't want them to be more frustrated when we come around. We always come in with all of the fun things. We work on those requesting. We give them all of the free time. We do pairing, working with them on different social skills within the classroom. So we might pull another kid or two and do turn taking. Every kiddo is different for what they are working on. I'm trying to think of what else we do. We do some data collection as far as maladaptive behaviors, but in the school, that's not our focus too much. We're more concerned about increasing the skills that we need to increase and just expecting the maladaptive behaviors to decrease. But yeah, so requesting, social, and then just whatever kind of specific programming we do. So like maybe some imitation, direction following, multi-step direction following, come here. We do a little bit of name recognition. It's not like an eye contact program. We don't really do anything like that anymore. But we do name recognition where we kind of work on getting the child to like turn around and look towards us or at least acknowledge that we're saying their name because that is an important life skill. But as far as eye contact, that's not something that we really do. I know other ABA places will still do that, just not really our cup of tea.
So, yeah, I don't mean to keep lingering on this, but so let's say, like you mentioned earlier, this specific goal of like asking for a drink of water. Let's say you have a kid who has like functionally no expressive communication. Like what, and earlier you also mentioned kind of breaking things down into
Yeah.
smaller steps. So like what steps are you going through to take that student from no functional communication to being able to maybe, use some sort of card system or an AAC or whatever it may be to ask you for that drink.
Yeah. So that's kind of where ABA and speech do butt heads a little bit. So from a ABA standpoint, we really do believe that functional communication, getting your basic wants and needs met is top priority. So we know through history that if they don't have an appropriate way to ask for something, they're going to ask for it in whatever way that they know works. So, kind
Mhm.
of if we have a student that comes in that we have kind of no history on, we're always going to grant access. I don't wanna say water because we'd never do that with basic needs, but say juice, like, we know that they have access to their
Mhm.
water and they want juice now. We would always grant access to the least, let me think of the word. Like, however they're going to ask us for it, we're always going to grant access for it until we can teach kind of the next level. So, kind of the basic would be if they reach for it or if they point to it or they take my hand and bring my hand to the item, we're always going to reinforce that and give them what they want, but we're also probably gonna show a little card of the juice and mimic or help prompt that peck exchange. If they already have an AAC, we'll just prompt them through how to ask for it on the AAC. We'll model ourselves using it on the AAC using the PEX cards. A lot of modeling, a lot of prompting, but if they show any kind of interest in gaining access to something, we're always going to provide it, as long as there's kind of a more appropriate way than there was the last time, if there were any kind of maladaptive behaviors.
It's just sort of more and more like closer approximations to the
Yes,
behavior that you want
yes,
over
successive
time.
approximations. I'm, like,
Yes.
rambling, so please.
No, that's okay. And I'm trying to be very careful because I know it's a common criticism
Yeah,
of AB
it is. Yeah.
to compare it to animal training, so I'm trying very to be very careful about that, but that's just sort of
Yeah.
how I'm connecting to it. But yeah, and like you said, you were talking about, if they don't learn the right way to ask for something, they're going to find a way to ask for something.
Mhm.
Like, I I used to work at a dog boarding facility, and you would be like, "Why is this dog scratching and barking and going nuts to get out of their room?" Well, because it thinks that's how the door opens.
Yes.
That dog's whole life, it's barked and scratched at the door, and someone's opened the door, and that's just how you open the door, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
you have to go through and teach them to sit nicely, and then I'll open the door, and then so it's just I don't know what the point of all that was.
No, yeah, I
I
get
just had to
all of
get
those
that out.
principles really are the same, like repetition.
Right.
I mean, the way that we practice repetition is different. Like I said, at the center that I had worked at, we were asking them to repeat the same exact answer 5, 6, 7 times in a row before you're allowed to stand up from the table. Results were shown a lot faster. The kids were learning how to ask for hundreds of things in a matter of months, but at what cost? Like, why do I have to sit here and force
Right.
you to sit here this whole time just so you can ask for things that you slightly showed an interest in 6 months ago because your goal says you need to master so many things. So we do repetition a little differently. We're gonna come in every day and practice this. We're going to practice it when the opportunity arises. If it's a social goal with just me and one student isn't really necessary. I mean, a 3-year-old
Yeah,
doesn't really wanna play with me. They wanna play with the other students for the most part. So, we do repetition and stuff like that a little bit differently, but it really is how kids learn. It's how all kids learn.
right. Well, the other criticism I've heard of that method you've described is that it's based on the assumption that the child doesn't understand what you're asking them, when it's entirely possible, and I've heard this from autistic people who either were nonverbal and then developed verbal skills maybe later in life or
Mhm.
other means of communications, that they know exactly what you're asking them, they just don't have the motor skill to do it.
Yes.
Like, if Erica, if I took you to to a basketball court and handed you a basketball and said, "Here, dunk this." Like, it's not that you don't understand what I'm asking you to do, it's that
Mhm.
you don't have the physical skills necessary
Yeah.
to dunk a basketball. So and I think a lot of people who are, in ABA therapy who experience what you've outlined just kind of shut down after a while because their intelligence isn't being taken into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So how do you measure sort of progress and success for different students?
So, like I said, our goals are kind of unofficial goals. They're based off of whatever the IEP has written. We all know IEP goals aren't always the best goals in the world, so we really take those with a grain of salt. But typically, I will come in and I'll do an assessment of kind of our basic level. So if we see, so imitation is one that I refer to a lot because it kind of is the foundation of life. So if I see a student is really struggling with imitation, I'll get their baseline of what they can imitate if they have the prerequisites to imitate. Like, can they look in my direction? Can they follow a simple one step instruction? So, for us, we would kind of base their progress off of where they were at the last time that we checked. So, we don't have any kind of one size fits all type of programming. Everything that we do is completely tailored to the student. In my experience at other places, that wasn't always the case, so we would have kind of a systematic flow chart of the way that you teach things, and these goals have to be met before you move on. But something that we've experienced throughout the county is there are some gaps in what the student might know versus what they're working on next. So just because they don't have very high imitation skills, their direction following skills could be through the roof. But piecing all of that together into an imitation skill might be a little hard for them. So we would really focus on implementing some of those following direction skills into how can we translate this into an imitation skill. So that's kind of a long tangent way of explaining that
No,
everything
that
is
makes
is
complete sense.
certain individualized.
How do you talked a little bit mostly about speech, but how do
Mhm.
you collaborate with sort of the rest of the therapists and teachers, or sort of the rest of the people on any given student's care team?
So OT, we always say that OT and ABA are besties because most of our kiddos with autism do have extreme sensory needs, whether super sensory aversive or sensory seeking. From a school perspective, we really hand all of that off to OT and ask for them to give us those sensory diets, provide us with any kind of weighted support. The clinical reason is because that kind of stuff isn't as evidence based that we would like. But from my perspective, is that's not my expertise. Any instance where I don't feel 100% confident in researching something enough to provide it as a service to another student is something that I'm gonna reach out and ask for help for, especially at our schools at least, the help is so readily available. I can walk down the hall and see PT, OT, and speech all in the same 2 offices. The physical therapy is we don't I mean, we do collaborate with them, but a lot of our kiddos that I can think of haven't really needed a whole lot of that physical assistance, which is very surprising. Like, sometimes our younger ones, like, will use physical therapy supports, like, for helping with sitting. I know especially with our pre-K kiddos, sometimes they really do struggle with sitting on the carpet. So, we'll work with PT on saying, like, "Well, the teacher is expecting them to sit on the carpet. Is that something you think motor-wise that they are able to do?" Uh, but as far as that I can think of, our PTs are kind of on their own little island out there. We know that they're always
Yeah,
available if we need them, but
mm, the other thing I would imagine that would also make you very closely aligned with OT, which I had never considered really at all before getting into all this, is visual tracking and how important that is to everything.
yeah.
And the better someone is able to visually track, the better they're gonna be able to engage in all your therapies as well.
Yeah.
So, I'd imagine that's a very important aspect of it.
Yeah. Something new to us this year too is using eye gaze AACs. We have one little girl who
Mhm.
does use an eye gaze AAC. She's not on our caseload, so I don't know a whole lot about her case, but that is something that I'm just intrigued with is how speech, OT, PT, how they all do have to come together. And she doesn't have a behavioral need, so I can't get my hands on her just yet. But seeing all of them come together on this one device is insane. I love it.
Yeah.
There are a few people within our community as well that do have the eye gaze devices as
I love
well.
that.
I don't know that Leo would sit still long enough for us to even try to use an
I
eye
don't
gaze
know
on.
either.
Yeah.
One family we talked to, she said I can't remember how old Oscar is. He's, like, mid I think he's, like, late teens, but she said he uses it almost exclusively to be a wise ass, like, just crack jokes, and it was really funny to listen to.
Yeah.
But,
It does always make us laugh whenever we have our kiddos first learning how to talk and they end up learning how to say, "Get away from me, leave me alone, I don't want to," and we're like, "We spent so long teaching you how to say these things, but you have to go to."
yeah, well, that and that is a tricky thing as
Yeah.
parents, and I'd imagine it would be as therapists too, is Leo used would hang out with me in the garage while I worked out. Well, the past, like, week or 2, every time we go out there, he just grabs me by the hand and keeps walking me towards the door of the garage because he wants to go inside. And it's
Mhm.
like, we wanted for so long you to be able to express yourself like this.
Yep.
And I feel like now that you can do it, we should be respectful of that. But also, I need to get this done. Like,
Yeah.
if if you can't hang out here with me, I can never work out again. So there is this balancing act of, like, practicality and also trying to kind of honor all the hard work
Yeah.
that kid has done.
It is kind of a more serious struggle too in the ABA community because there are some things that so we don't do any kind of forced compliance, like, that is another touchy subject in ABA before was, "I'm the adult, you're the student, you do what I say no matter what it is, and if you're not gonna do it, we're gonna sit here until it gets done." That's just not something that we do, but there are some instances where you're not in a safe environment, and we have to physically move you to somewhere that is safer. So if they are trying to run out into a street, what's the line between, "We don't wanna force you to do what I need you to do, but it's also an extreme safety hazard if you don't." So that's kind of where we see that
Right.
struggle between, we know that we're gonna have to physically intervene, but we really don't want to. We don't wanna break that autonomy. We want you to be able to advocate for yourself, but sometimes that's just not possible. So I that is
Yeah.
one kind of iffy situation too where I see in our field that's still occurring, but it's like that as parents too. We don't always I mean, we've all done the football hold carrying our toddler through Walmart or something, like, it it comes down to that with any kid, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so what advice would you give parents who maybe feel unheard or have sort of the common criticisms that occur around ABA, things like that, people who feel like maybe the system isn't working for them?
Something so I thought about this one a lot whenever I was looking at the outline. A lot of BCBAs aren't gonna be happy that I say this, but your child does not need 40 hours a week of intensive direct instruction ABA. Your child, in my opinion, the more general education exposure that your child can have is absolutely going to be more beneficial in the long run. The results that you see as far as some of those academic skills or the social skills or the communicative skills might take a little bit longer to get where you want them to be, but exposure has so much more benefits to me than sitting one-on-one with an adult. But then on the flip side of that, you are your child's best advocate, and you have to sometimes fight to get what your child deserves within a public school system. It's something that I've seen. I'm not technically an administrator, but I'm kind of in that border between I advocate for what the teachers need, but I'm also absolutely gonna advocate for what the students need, and I'm gonna ruffle some feathers with administration if I feel that the decision that they're making isn't what's best. You guys and collaborating with your teachers are the ones who know your child 100%, and even with me, I don't spend 40 hours a week in a classroom with your kid. So if you tell me that something is happening, I'm going to believe you. And not all school districts are like that. So just knowing that you are your child's best advocate, looking up your district's policies and your state laws, making sure that you have all of the information available, hire advocates if you need to, just whatever you can do to get your child everything that they deserve is it's worth the fight in my opinion.
Yeah. On the subject you were talking about of, like, maybe, quote, unquote, "over therapying" kids, like, there is a I'll have to look this up later. There was a book I read, and she talks a lot about that because, like, your kids actually need that random input in, whether it's their brain or their
Mhm.
body or whatever, so that they can sort of have the necessary, like, aggregate material to be able to build those skills. And, like, if you're
Yeah.
just trying to teach them a skill through therapy all the time, but they don't have the necessary things to be able to do it, then it's not gonna do any good. It's like if you were gonna build a house and you had them deliver all the lumber still as logs. Like, there's a very
Yeah.
limited n you could probably still build a house like that, but there's a very limited number of configurations you're gonna have. Whereas if you had it all cut down to, 2 by 4s, 2 by 6s, all the different dimensional lumber and things, all the different components that are a lot smaller, it's still the same amount of material, but you're going to be able to be a lot more flexible in how you configure it with the same amount of material. I don't know if that analogy makes sense,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. We say that all the time.
yeah.
So we have kids that do transition back to the school system from clinical settings. So last year we had a boy transition into 2nd grade, and academically, he was still on a pre-K kindergarten level, but he was receiving 40 hours a week of just straight ABA. They weren't doing any kind of academic training within that ABA setting. It was strictly life skills and behavioral and just daily living, which is great. But once it was time to transition back to school, unfortunately, he wasn't ready to transition back to a general ed classroom. We had to kind of bump him back a little bit, which is something that we didn't think that we were going to have to do. I mean, he was meeting goals, he was surpassing the goals that they had had in a clinic, but you can't really teach classroom behavior without being in a classroom. So that's one of the kind of the caveats of over over therapy, like you had said.
Right, yeah, and also they're if maybe they're in a clinical program and it puts this overemphasis on life skills, that also goes back to the sort of intelligence aspect again,
Mhm.
where, like, it's not, eh, just because they can't tie their shoes or, use a fork or whatever, doesn't mean they're not capable of, reading or doing math or what it doesn't mean
Yes, absolutely.
that everyone who can't is, there is a certain amount of intellectual disability that may or may not come along, but it's not necessarily the case. And I've, again, heard a lot of stories of people who say, "Well, I'm an ABA, and again, because I can't tie my shoes, I don't get to learn math or, read Shakespeare or whatever it is." And those 2 things are completely separate from each other.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have a little boy, I think he's, like, 1st or 2nd grade, he's not very old, he just came to us, parents moved kind of out of nowhere, we didn't really know anything about him, so we just had him in one of our autism intensive classrooms until we could get his assessments and get him appropriately placed, and he struggled with potty training, no big deal, that's something we do all the time, but On his iPad, from memory, he would write the ending scripts from movies, like, down to the exact authors. We would say, "Well, what's the Toy Story ending credits?" And it would be, like, 2 pages on a Word document that he would type word for word, punctuation correctly, quotations where they were supposed to be, and it was for us, it was just mind blowing. We're like, "Buddy, where'd you come from?" Like, we loved it. So then throughout learning, it's called Gestalt language processing. It's still kind of a little bit new to us. We haven't seen too much of it before, but that's how we kind of shaped his communication, and it's just something that I never would've even thought about before. Like, when you look at
Yeah, I have a friend whose son is autistic, and he is almost entirely nonverbal, but he can write and read, not fluently, but bits and pieces of
Mhm.
about 20 different languages, where, like,
Wow.
like, you watch a movie just as an example, like, you might watch a foreign movie with subtitles. Well, he watches that movie one time, and everything that was said with the subtitles, he now remembers.
Yeah,
So again, just the capabilities of these kids
yeah.
are sometimes astounding. So what resources would you recommend for families trying to support their
So I thought I had the book with me. I can send you a picture of it if you wanted to kind of upload it to your thing, but something that we use a lot is called ABA Visualized. Basically, it takes down all of these different behavior strategies and breaks it into like different pictures that you can follow on. So one is easy, easy, hard. So that's the informal way of saying behavior momentum. So if we know a kiddo is struggling with something really hard, we give them a couple easy things to do, kind of build up their spirits, and then ask them to do something that's harder. But the way that the book breaks it down into such simple visuals, but also simple language is super parent friendly. We reference it in conference presentations all the time. Love it. She has a whole different system. So there's ABA Visualized, there's AAC Visualized, which is something that we've been looking into since AAC collaboration is so much more prominent. Behavior intervention plan visualized or BIP visualized, which is really good if your schools want to do kind of a behavior plan with any of your kiddos. It kind of gives you an idea of what all of that lingo means. Behavior is it's unnecessarily hard to understand sometimes in special education, which just doesn't make any sense, but just the way that she can kind of relate those topics in a way to where everyone could understand it is great. And then on Instagram, as far as, like, kind of unofficial help, I guess. I really like Autism Little Learners and the Autism Helper. So they both do different kind of curriculums. We buy a lot of their visuals that they already have pre-made. So if you're just kind of looking just for generic things that you're wondering, "Oh, like, I wonder what Autism Little Learners has posted this week. Maybe it's something that Leo would like." They have amazing visual support systems already made that you can buy for just, like, a couple dollars, or they do, like, free emails every week. Um, Simply Special Ed is one that I really like on Instagram too, as far as kind of bringing ABA principles into classrooms. I like it for parents to kinda give their teachers ideas of things that might help with their student, and I also really love it for teachers trying to set up some of these autism programs. So it's a newer concept in a lot of schools where they have specific classrooms for autistic kids, which is great as long as it's used in the right way. So the way that she kind of breaks it down into making it still as inclusive as possible, but providing that one-on-one support that they do need, just kind of in a way that makes it all make sense on like why she's doing things the way that she's doing.
awesome, yeah. Um, just for our listeners and for my own sanity, Kids Without Limits is the book that I was thinking of earlier. So
Oh,
I just
okay.
needed to say that to get that
Yeah.
chest. Yes. Um, so can you talk about sort of the concept of presuming competence and sort of what it means to you and how you implement it?
So I feel like, especially with the, let me think. So the big shift
Take your time.
in trauma informed ABA to me and making things more assent based and not forcing compliance to me is how I understand presuming competence. Like we were kind of joking about like we waited all of this time for them to be able to refuse something and now it's like just kidding, you have to do it. But it is something that we do take for granted for a lot of our typical kiddos. So we know we know deep down that these behaviors that they're having are ways that they're trying to tell us something, but the idea that the idea that they've learned this for so long, they're never going to move past that, or they're never gonna be able to learn how to communicate or understand what we have to say, just isn't something that I'm okay with, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us maybe a story from your work as a BCBA that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. So it was actually when I was a registered behavior tech. I was just hired in the middle of October, which, if you know, in a school system, October is like scary for not Halloween reasons. Like everyone just kind of is at their wits' end. Like the school is just, the honeymoon phases are over. We're just not having it anymore. Like all kids are just kind of crazy in October. So it's the end of the month, and I first got hired, and my boss was like, "Hey, we have a student in preschool that's like extremely aggressive. He's hurting other students. They just need help. Like they need another person just to go in there and help." So I was like, "Okay, like I could do that. That's what I'm here for." So I go in, and when I tell you he sat at his desk and did everything by the book, I was like, "You guys are just kind of crazy. Like there's nothing that I need to be here for. I don't understand what the problem is." Well, day 2, I showed up, and he was like, "I remember you. Let's go." So we had a day. I mean, we were flipping tables, we were doing all of these things. Well, he had a speech, like, apraxia he had apraxia, so his speech just he couldn't communicate what he was looking for, and the speech therapist that we had at the time, she was wonderful, but she was about 75, and they just weren't connecting. Like, it was very much you sit down, you practice your articulation, and then you go, like, your 15 minutes are done, and he wasn't that kinda kid. Like, he was the one we were running laps up and down the hallways. Like, I think I lost 15 pounds that school year working with him. Wonderful kid, but he just needed so much more than what that speech therapist was able to give him. So, I ended up making a little PEX board, and it was, like, 6 years ago, so it was kind of before the whole ABA speech, PEX, yes or no kind of shift. So I came up with this little PEX board, and I was like, "If you need something, you tell me on here." By the end of that school year, he went from, like, probably 60 to 70 aggressive moments per day down to 5 or 6. And that was within maybe a span of 8 months from October
Oh, that's amazing.
till his IEP meeting, and that was one of those moments where I was like, "Man, like, what I'm doing actually makes a difference." And
Yeah.
we've had so many students like that where just once that communication light bulb clicks, you can see the world open up, and I think that's why I'm still so convinced that functional communication training is so important.
Yeah, and I try to be very careful about how I word things because I don't wanna sound like I'm, like, putting unnecessary guilt or blame on parents, but a
Mhm.
lot of times if they have those negative behaviors, it's because they need something that they're not getting. It's not just, like,
Yeah.
a function of autism or just because there's some sort of, chaotic agent in the world. They're just trying to fill a need, and they're
Yeah.
they're escalating to more and more extreme strategies to try
Right.
to try to figure out how to do that.
Especially if last time if I hit you and it worked, the next time I'm not gonna go through all of those other things. I'm going to hit you because I know it's going to work. So kind of
Right, exactly, and
backtracking.
that
Yeah.
goes back to the dog scratching at the door, like, that's just how doors open, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, it's just the way to them, it's just the way the thing works.
Right.
Yeah. So, if you could give every parent, raising a child with, support needs one piece of encouragement, what would it be?
I would say, especially from our kind of ABA perspective, I would say slow progress is still progress. So like I've said before, and even Haley and I are friends on Facebook, and she probably is like, "Oh, there Erica goes again." But I I will not risk a child's dignity just to make progress, and that's okay. I mean, all kids are already so different. No 2 kids follow the same exact milestone curve anyway. So, if you are noticing just the smallest amount of progress, that means it's still there and whatever you're doing is working. Whether it's taking hours, days, years, the progress is still there.
Right, yeah, and just because something isn't necessarily like a lot of times that, with school systems and even like medical systems and stuff, there's a lot of like test retest stuff.
Mhm.
And I know it's easy to get discouraged because on the test retest, it may seem like they haven't made much progress, but that also may just because the system that you're using isn't high enough resolution to accurately document the progression that that student is making. Like,
Right.
we talked to someone she's also an MCHS mom, but she's a physicist. Well, she was going to be a physicist. She ended up becoming an engineer, and she works on systems relative to speech that are able to document that progress because a lot of those systems for people with special needs just don't currently exist. So if you feel like I guess the short version of this is if you feel like you're making progress, you are.
Yeah, exactly. I know just for the sake of time in a school district, we use the VB MAP system or assessment a lot. It's the verbal behavior milestones, competency. I can't, I don't remember the exact termination, but basically it's just verbal behavior scored onto one assessment. And we use that assessment, but we don't only base our results off of that one assessment. Just being in a school
Right. Yes.
system, we can't do 2, 3 things for every student we have. We have over 50 kids on our caseload, so we take it
Right.
with a grain of salt, just kinda gives us, like, a starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice would you give to teachers or, aides, paraprofessionals who want to better support and include neurodivergent students?
One of the things that I would think I actually dealt with it today, so it kind of is fresh in my brain, but just because you think it's reinforcement doesn't mean the student thinks it's reinforcement, and without really good reinforcement, ABA practices aren't going to work. I'm thinking of things like sticker charts, like, not every student is going to be okay with your classroom reward system or your sticker chart, but take the time as a teacher to learn what your student actually wants and actually enjoys, because the more that you can use those types of things to connect with your students, you're going to see so much more from your students than if they don't feel like they're being listened to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Erica, for your time, for coming on to share what you do with us. I personally, like I said, I've heard a lot of criticism about ABA, so it's really good to hear that there are people who are taking that into account and sort of adjusting their approach accordingly.
Yeah,
So, as always, thank you to our listeners. If you have any questions, comments, just want to talk, you can find us on Facebook or email us at mef2cast@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody.